You've been lied to about how well you understand yourself. Not by your parents, not by your teachers, not even by the internet, by your own brain. Every single day, the 3-pound organ sitting inside your skull runs programs you never installed, makes decisions you never approved, and tells stories about reality that would fall apart under 5 minutes of scrutiny. And the wildest part, you're convinced you're the one in control. According to neuroscience research, roughly 95% of brain activity happens below the level of conscious awareness. That means the version of you, making choices, forming opinions, and reacting to the world, is basically a passenger who thinks they're driving the car. So here's what nobody tells you. There are psychological patterns governing almost everything you do, everything you feel, and everything you assume about the people around you, and most of them are completely invisible unless someone points them out. These are 25 of them, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. Let's start with one that hides in plain sight. If ice in your drink isn't floating, you've got a much bigger problem than a watered-down cocktail. But forget the physics for a second, because the psychology here is what matters. Researchers have found that people are remarkably bad at noticing things that are wrong, as long as everything looks roughly normal on the surface. This is called normalcy bias, and it affects nearly 70% of people during emergencies and unexpected situations. The brain sees what it expects to see. If someone hands you a glass and there's liquid and ice in it, your brain checks the box and moves on. It doesn't analyze whether the ice is behaving correctly. It doesn't care. It already decided the situation was normal, and now it's thinking about something else entirely. Here's the thing about normalcy bias. It doesn't just apply to ice cubes. It applies to relationships, to careers, to health, to every situation where something is slowly going wrong, but the surface still looks fine. People stay in toxic jobs for years because the paycheck still clears. People ignore symptoms because they still feel mostly okay. The brain is wired to conserve energy, and questioning reality takes a lot of energy. So it doesn't. It takes the shortcut. It assumes normal, and that assumption can cost you everything. The antidote, and researchers have confirmed this, is deliberately practicing what psychologists call situational awareness. People who train themselves to periodically question whether things are actually fine, not just apparently fine, catch problems an average of 40% earlier than those who don't. Simple math, really, but almost nobody does it. Now here's one that makes people uncomfortable at parties. If someone constantly shakes their leg, most people assume it's anxiety or nervousness. Makes sense, right? The fidgeting, the restless energy, the inability to sit still, looks like someone who can't relax. But research from the field of behavioral psychology tells a completely different story. Repetitive leg shaking, also called psychomotor agitation in clinical settings, is often a sign of excess cognitive processing. In plain English, it means the brain is working harder than the body can keep up with. Studies published in neuropsychological journals found that people who engage in rhythmic, repetitive movements while thinking actually show higher levels of focus and concentration on complex tasks. The movement creates a kind of feedback loop, a physical metronome that helps the brain regulate its processing speed. Think about it. Have you ever noticed that you tap your foot when you're trying to solve a problem? Or bounce your knee during an exam? That's not nervousness. That's your body trying to help your brain think faster. The weird part is that people who shake their legs habitually tend to score higher on tests of working memory and cognitive flexibility. Not always, and not by huge margins, but consistently enough that researchers noticed. The real signal isn't the shaking itself. It's why people assume it means nervousness. And that tells you something about how quick humans are to label behavior they don't understand as something negative. Psychologists call this the fundamental attribution error. When someone else does something, we assume it reflects their personality. When we do the same thing, we blame the situation. Someone else shaking their leg? Anxious wreck? You shaking your leg? Just thinking hard. Same behavior. Completely different story. And the brain doesn't even notice it's doing this. And that's the deeper issue. The bias isn't just out there. It lives inside you too. Integrating your shadow means recognizing the parts of your mind that distort reality without asking for permission. If you're ready to go beyond spotting cognitive errors in others and start working on the ones operating in you, check out the SIM Method ebook. It's a concise guide designed to help you integrate your shadows and your light, unlocking real inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. but that's nothing compared to this one. If someone laughs or talks a lot, the instinct is to label them as happy, extroverted, the life of the party. And sometimes that's accurate. But psychological research suggests that excessive talking and frequent laughter are, in a significant number of cases, sophisticated defense mechanisms. A major study on social behavior found that people who experienced childhood emotional neglect were 62% more likely to develop what therapists call performative extroversion as adults. They learned, usually before age 10, that being entertaining kept people close, that if they could make someone laugh, that person would stay. That silence meant abandonment. So they filled every silence, every single one. Here's the thing about this pattern. It's nearly invisible from the outside because it looks exactly like confidence. The person who always has a joke, who never lets the conversation die, who seems endlessly energetic in social situations, they look like they've got it all figured out. But underneath, there's often an engine running on fear. Fear that if they stop performing, people will leave. That if the room goes quiet, they'll be forgotten. Therapists call it the class clown paradox. The person who makes everyone else feel comfortable is frequently the one who feels least comfortable of all. And the research backs this up. A study tracking social behavior across 5 years found that individuals with the highest rates of social performance, meaning talking, joking, and engaging, also reported the highest rates of loneliness. Not all of them, but enough to matter. Enough to make you look at that one friend differently. The one who always seems fine. Pretty clever survival mechanism, right? Except it comes at a cost. The person performing never gets to show who they actually are, because the performance takes up all the space. Now let's talk about something that most people don't even realize has psychological data behind it. If someone has intimacy with a woman daily, there's a cascade of neurochemical events happening that goes far beyond what most people think. Researchers have documented that regular physical intimacy triggers the release of oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone, at levels 3 to 4 times higher than those found in people with less frequent physical contact. But that's just the surface. The deeper finding is about cortisol, the stress hormone. A longitudinal study tracking couples over 18 months found that individuals engaging in regular intimate contact showed cortisol levels that were, on average, 22% lower than control groups. And lower cortisol doesn't just mean less stress. It means better immune function, improved memory consolidation, reduced inflammation, and, here's the part nobody talks about, significantly better decision-making. Cortisol clouds judgment. It makes people reactive, short-tempered, impulsive. When cortisol drops, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, reasoning, and impulse control, gets more resources. In practical terms, people in regular intimate relationships don't just feel calmer. They literally think more clearly. Their brains work better, and the effect compounds over time. After about 90 days of consistent intimacy, brain scans show measurable changes in neural connectivity, particularly in areas associated with emotional regulation and empathy. The brain physically rewires itself. Sounds crazy, right? But the data is solid. The reason nobody tells you this is probably because it makes people uncomfortable to talk about intimacy as a cognitive enhancer. But that's exactly what the research shows it is. Here's one that sounds completely backwards. If someone sleeps with windows open, even in cold weather, they're not being reckless. They might actually be optimizing their sleep architecture in a way that most people never figure out. Sleep researchers have known for decades that the ideal sleeping temperature is between 60 and 67 degrees Fahrenheit. That's colder than most people keep their bedrooms. But here's what recent studies have added to that picture. When ambient temperature drops, the body initiates a thermoregulatory process that actually accelerates the transition into deep sleep. The core body temperature needs to drop by about 2 to 3 degrees for the brain to enter the slow-wave sleep phase, which is where the real restoration happens. Memory consolidation, tissue repair, immune system boosting, all of it happens in deep sleep. And cool air makes the body get there faster. A study from the National Institutes of Health found that participants who slept in rooms set to 66 degrees produced 42% more brown fat than those sleeping at 75 degrees. Brown fat burns calories to generate heat, which means sleeping cold doesn't just improve sleep quality, it changes metabolic function. People who figured this out intuitively, the ones cracking their windows in January, They're accidentally following advice that sleep scientists charge hundreds of dollars to give. The weird part is that most people resist this because it feels counterintuitive. Comfort feels warm. But biologically, comfort is cool. The brain sleeps better when it's cold. The data is unambiguous on this. But all of that might not matter if you don't understand this next one. Your brain deletes more than it remembers, not a little more, overwhelmingly more. Neuroscientists estimate that the brain processes roughly 11 million bits of sensory information every second. Conscious awareness handles about 50. That's not a typo. 50 out of 11 million. Your brain is basically a bouncer at the world's most exclusive club, and almost nothing gets in. So what decides what makes the cut? Emotion. The brain flags experiences that carry emotional weight and files them for long-term storage. Everything else gets dumped. This is why you can remember exactly where you were during a shocking news event, but can't remember what you had for lunch 3 days ago. Both happened. Both were real experiences. But one had emotional voltage, and one didn't. Here's the thing about this filtering system. It means that the version of your past that you carry around, the memories that form your identity, your story about who you are, is a heavily edited highlight reel, not a documentary. And the editor isn't rational, it's emotional, which means the past you remember isn't the past that happened. It's the past that felt the strongest. Psychologists have shown that this creates predictable distortions. People who experienced intense negative emotions during a period of their life will remember that entire period as negative, even if objectively good things also happened. The emotional filter overwrites the data, and you make decisions today based on that corrupted file. This is where things get really interesting. You know that feeling when you learn a new word and then suddenly hear it everywhere? That's not a coincidence, and it's not magic. It's called the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, or frequency illusion, and it reveals something profound about how perception works. Your brain doesn't passively receive reality. It actively constructs it. The reticular activating system, a network of neurons in the brainstem, acts as a gatekeeper that decides what information rises to conscious awareness. When something is flagged as relevant, whether because you just learned it or because it's emotionally charged, the gatekeeper starts letting related information through. The information was always there. You just couldn't see it. Researchers have demonstrated this experimentally. When participants were primed with a specific concept, they identified related stimuli up to 300 milliseconds faster than unprimed participants. Their brains literally started processing that category of information preferentially. This has massive implications. It means that what you focus on literally shapes what you perceive. If you're focused on problems, your brain will surface problems. If you're focused on opportunities, your brain will surface opportunities. Not because reality changed, because your filter changed. This isn't motivational poster nonsense. This is neuroscience. Now here's one that explains a lot about human conflict. When someone criticizes you, your brain processes it in the same region that processes physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insula light up identically, whether you stub your toe or someone tells you your work isn't good enough. Social pain and physical pain share neural hardware. A landmark study gave participants either acetaminophen or a placebo over 3 weeks, then measured their response to social rejection in brain scanners. The acetaminophen group showed significantly reduced neural activity in pain regions during social exclusion. A painkiller reduced emotional pain. Because to the brain, it's the same thing. This is why criticism feels like an attack, because neurologically, it is one. The brain doesn't distinguish between a threat to your body and a threat to your social standing. Both trigger the same alarm system. Both flood the body with cortisol and adrenaline. Both activate fight-or-flight responses. And here's the real kicker. Research shows that negative social experiences are processed roughly 5 times more intensely than positive ones. Psychologists call this negativity bias. One cruel comment can undo 20 compliments. Not because you're weak, but because your brain is wired to prioritize threats over rewards. It kept your ancestors alive. It makes modern life miserable. Speaking of things your ancestors would recognize, if you've ever noticed that you think more clearly after a walk, there's a reason for that, and it goes deeper than fresh air and exercise. Stanford researchers found that walking increases creative output by an average of 60%. Not running, not intense exercise. walking. Specifically, walking at a self-selected, comfortable pace. The researchers tested participants on divergent thinking tasks, the kind that required generating multiple solutions to open-ended problems, and found that walkers consistently outperformed sitters, even when the walkers were on a treadmill facing a blank wall. It wasn't the scenery. It wasn't the nature. It was the movement itself. Neuroscientists believe this happens because walking activates the default mode network, the brain system associated with daydreaming, imagination, and connecting distant ideas. When you're sitting and focusing, the task-positive network dominates. When you walk, the default mode network takes over, and that's where creative insight lives. This is why so many historical thinkers were obsessive walkers. They weren't doing it for their health. They were doing it because it made them smarter. Here's one that changes how you look at every conversation you've ever had. Research shows that in any given interaction, only about 7% of communication is verbal. The rest is split between tone of voice, which accounts for roughly 38%, and body language, which handles the remaining 55%. This means that when you're talking to someone, the words are almost irrelevant compared to how you say them and what your body is doing while you say them. And the brain knows this instinctively. When verbal and nonverbal signals conflict, the brain trusts the nonverbal ones almost every time. Someone can say, "I'm fine," with a tone and posture that scream the opposite. And you'll believe the body over the words without even thinking about it. But here's the thing about this. Most people only consciously monitor words. They listen to what someone says and take it at face value. Meanwhile, their subconscious is reading every micro-expression, every shift in posture, every change in vocal pitch, and forming a completely separate assessment. That gut feeling you get about someone? That's your subconscious assessment, built on the 93% of communication that your conscious mind is ignoring. This next one might make you rethink your entire social strategy. Psychologists discovered something called the pratfall effect, and it basically says that competent people become more likable when they make a mistake, not less, more. In the original experiment, participants listened to recordings of someone answering quiz questions. When a clearly competent person spilled coffee on themselves, their likability ratings went up. When an average person did the same thing, their ratings went down. The interpretation is fascinating. Perfection creates distance. It makes people feel inadequate by comparison. But when a competent person shows a flaw, it makes them relatable, accessible, human. It signals that they're not a threat. The practical implication is counterintuitive. If you're good at something, showing occasional vulnerability doesn't weaken your position. It strengthens it. People trust flawed competence more than flawless performance, because flawless performance triggers suspicion. The brain wonders what you're hiding. And then there's the two-pizza rule of friendship. Research in social psychology has consistently shown that the maximum number of close relationships a human brain can maintain is somewhere around 5. Not 50. Not 500. 5. This comes from studies on what's called Dunbar's number. While the brain can track about 150 social relationships total, the innermost circle, the people you would call at 3 in the morning, caps out at roughly 5. And trying to push past that limit doesn't expand your support network. It dilutes it. People with 20 best friends tend to report lower satisfaction with their relationships than people with 3 or 4 deep ones. The brain isn't built for breadth at the deepest level. It's built for depth. Quality over quantity isn't just a cliché. It's a neurological constraint. Here's something that'll change how you use your phone. Every time a notification pings, your brain gets a tiny hit of dopamine. Not because the notification is rewarding, but because it might be. This is the exact same mechanism that makes slot machines addictive. Variable ratio reinforcement, the most powerful schedule of reinforcement ever discovered in behavioral psychology. Sometimes the notification is exciting. Usually it's not. But the uncertainty is what hooks you. Researchers have found that the anticipation of a reward actually produces more dopamine than the reward itself. Your brain is essentially addicted to the possibility of something good, which means it will keep checking, keep scrolling, keep swiping. Not because it's getting something, but because it might. This is why you can pick up your phone, check it, find nothing interesting, put it down, and pick it up again 60 seconds later. It's not a willpower problem. It's a neurochemistry problem. The system was designed to exploit exactly this vulnerability. Now nobody tells you this one, because it sounds too simple. But mirroring, the unconscious tendency to copy the body language of someone you're interacting with, is one of the most powerful social tools in existence. When two people are in rapport, their body language naturally synchronizes. They cross their legs at the same time, lean in at the same angle, match each other's speaking pace. This happens automatically when connection is genuine. But researchers found that deliberately mirroring someone's posture and gestures increases their reported trust and liking by up to 67%. They don't know why they trust you more. They just do. Because to the subconscious brain, synchronized movement signals alliance. It says, this person is like me. This person is safe. And the subconscious doesn't question its own conclusions. Here's one about decision-making that explains a lot about modern life. The average adult makes approximately 35,000 decisions per day. Most of them are trivial: what to wear, what to eat, which email to open first. But they all draw from the same pool of mental energy. Psychologists call it decision fatigue, and the research on it is alarming. A famous study of judges found that prisoners who appeared before the parole board in the morning received favorable rulings about 65% of the time. By late afternoon, that number dropped to nearly zero. Same judges, same types of cases, different time of day. The judges weren't biased. They were tired. When mental energy runs low, the brain defaults to the safest option, which in parole decisions means denial. In your life, it means saying no to opportunities, choosing the familiar over the new, and making impulse purchases because your brain is too exhausted to resist. This is where things get tricky. Have you ever noticed that you're a completely different person depending on who you're with? That's not fakeness. That's code switching, and it's a universal human behavior documented by psychologists for decades. Everyone maintains multiple social identities, and the brain automatically activates different ones depending on context. You're one person with your boss, another with your best friend, another with your parents, and yet another alone. Research shows that this isn't deception. It's adaptation. The brain optimizes social behavior for each environment, selecting the personality traits, vocabulary, and behavioral patterns most likely to achieve positive outcomes in that specific context. People who are unable to code switch, interestingly, tend to struggle socially. They come across as rigid, inappropriate, or tone-deaf. The ability to fluidly shift between social identities is actually a sign of high emotional intelligence, not low authenticity. And here's one that'll make you look at colors differently. The color red has been shown to increase heart rate, raise blood pressure, and stimulate appetite. This isn't cultural. It's biological. Research across multiple cultures found consistent physiological responses to the color red, suggesting it's hardwired into the human nervous system, likely because red is the color of blood, ripe fruit, and danger signals in nature. Restaurants figured this out decades ago, which is why so many fast food logos and interiors use red. It makes you hungrier and more impulsive, a perfect combination for selling food quickly. But the effect goes beyond appetite. Studies on athletic competition found that athletes wearing red won significantly more often than those in blue, across sports ranging from boxing to soccer. The researchers controlled for skill level. Red still won. The hypothesis is that red triggers a subtle dominant signal in both the wearer and the opponent, creating a tiny but measurable psychological edge. Now here's one about lying that most people get completely wrong. The common belief is that liars avoid eye contact. Every crime show, every body language book, every parent telling their kid to look me in the eyes reinforces this idea. But research consistently shows that liars actually maintain more eye contact than truth tellers, not less. Why? Because liars know the stereotype. They compensate. They deliberately hold eye contact to appear trustworthy, while truth tellers feel no need to manage the impression and look away naturally as they access memories. Studies from forensic psychology found that the most reliable indicators of deception aren't visual at all. They're verbal. Liars tend to use fewer first-person pronouns, provide too much detail about irrelevant aspects, and take longer to begin answering direct questions. The body language myth persists because it's intuitive and simple. Reality, as usual, is messier. Speaking of things that are messier than they seem, the placebo effect isn't just real, it's getting stronger. Meta-analyses published in medical journals found that placebo responses in clinical trials have increased significantly over the past 3 decades, particularly in studies conducted in the United States. Patients given sugar pills are improving more than they used to. Nobody fully understands why. One theory is that as medical culture becomes more sophisticated and trust in medicine grows, the brain's expectation of healing becomes stronger, and that expectation alone produces measurable physiological changes. Placebos have been shown to release actual endorphins, change neural activity in brain scans, and produce genuine anti-inflammatory responses. The brain is so powerful that believing in a cure can partially create one. And the ethical implications of this are something most medical professionals don't like to talk about publicly. Here's one about sleep that contradicts almost everything you've been told. The 8-hour sleep recommendation is, according to a growing body of research, somewhat arbitrary. Large-scale studies tracking hundreds of thousands of participants found that the lowest mortality rates were associated with 7 hours of sleep, not 8. People sleeping 8 or more hours actually showed slightly higher mortality risks than 7-hour sleepers. This doesn't mean 8 hours will hurt you. It means the rigid 8 hours or you're failing message creates unnecessary anxiety. And that anxiety, ironically, disrupts sleep. Sleep researchers now emphasize consistency over duration. Going to bed and waking up at the same time every day, including weekends, appears to matter more than hitting a specific number. The brain's circadian rhythm depends on regularity, and disrupting it, even to get extra sleep, can impair the very restoration that sleep is supposed to provide. This next one explains something you feel every single day but probably can't name. Ego depletion is the theory that self-control draws from a limited daily reservoir of willpower. And while the theory has been debated, the practical reality that people experience it is not in dispute. You start the morning with a full tank. Every act of restraint, every suppressed impulse, every difficult conversation, every resisted temptation drains it. By evening, the tank is nearly empty. This is why diets fail at night, why arguments happen after work, and why the worst decisions are made when you're already exhausted from a day of being responsible. The practical solution that researchers suggest is absurdly simple. Reduce the number of decisions you have to make. Automate what you can. Eat the same breakfast. Lay out your clothes the night before. Remove temptations from your environment, rather than relying on willpower to resist them. The people who appear to have extraordinary self-discipline often don't. They just structured their lives to need less of it. Here's one about music that most people find surprising. Listening to sad music when you're already sad doesn't make you sadder. It makes you feel better. Researchers studying emotional regulation found that sad music activates the hormone prolactin, which is associated with comfort and consolation. The brain essentially prepares for a grief response, but because no actual loss is occurring, the prolactin creates a feeling of being comforted without the corresponding pain. It's like getting a hug from a song. Participants in studies consistently reported that listening to sad music during negative mood states produced feelings of being understood and less alone. The music validated their experience without amplifying it. Happy music, by contrast, often made sad people feel worse, because the disconnect between the music's mood and their internal state created cognitive dissonance. The lesson is counterintuitive, but backed by data. When you're down, lean into the sadness musically. It's not wallowing. It's biochemistry. And speaking of counterintuitive, the bystander effect, the tendency for individuals to be less likely to help in an emergency when others are present, isn't really about apathy. It's about information processing. When someone collapses on a crowded street and nobody helps, it's not because everyone is heartless. It's because everyone is looking at everyone else's reaction to determine what's happening. If nobody is reacting, the brain concludes nothing is wrong. This is called pluralistic ignorance. Each person individually thinks something might be wrong, but because nobody else is acting on that thought, each person suppresses their own assessment. The solution, as emergency training teaches, is brutally specific. Don't shout, "Someone call 911." Point at one person and say, "You in the blue jacket, call 911." Specificity breaks the diffusion of responsibility. It assigns the task to an individual, and individuals help. Groups hesitate. Here's one about memory that makes people deeply uncomfortable. You don't actually remember events. You remember the last time you remembered them. Every time you recall a memory, the brain doesn't play back a recording. It reconstructs the memory from scratch. And in the reconstruction process, it introduces errors, fills in gaps with plausible details, and incorporates information from other memories or even from things you were told happened. Research on memory reconsolidation has shown that each act of remembering slightly alters the memory itself. Your most treasured childhood memory has been edited every single time you've thought about it. The memory you have now might share only the rough outline with what actually happened. This isn't a flaw, it's how the system works, and it has profound implications for everything from eyewitness testimony to personal identity. This one changes how you think about goals. Research on motivation has found that telling people about your goals makes you significantly less likely to achieve them. When you announce a goal and receive social recognition for it, the brain experiences a premature sense of accomplishment. The dopamine reward that was supposed to come from completing the goal gets partially consumed by the announcement itself. Psychologists call it social reality. Your brain treats the positive feedback from announcing the goal as evidence that progress has been made, reducing the urgency to actually do the work. Studies confirm this. Participants who announced their intentions completed significantly less work toward their goals than those who kept quiet. The ones who stayed silent maintained higher levels of what researchers call identity-related behavioral intention, meaning they still felt the psychological gap between where they were and where they wanted to be. That gap is motivating. Closing it prematurely with social validation removes the fuel. And finally, here's the one that ties everything together. You are not who you think you are. The self, the stable, continuous you that you experience, is largely a narrative construction. Neuroscientists and psychologists have accumulated decades of evidence showing that the sense of a unified self is something the brain creates after the fact, not something that exists in advance and directs behavior. Your brain makes a decision up to 7 seconds before you become aware of it, then constructs a story about why you made that choice. The left hemisphere is particularly aggressive about this. It takes whatever happens, fabricates a plausible explanation, and presents it to consciousness as truth. Psychologists call this the interpreter function. You think you chose the blue shirt because it matches your eyes. Your brain chose the blue shirt for reasons even it doesn't fully understand, then told you a story about eye matching because stories are what brains do. This isn't disturbing, it's liberating. Because if the self is a story, it's a story you can edit. Not easily, not overnight. But the research on neuroplasticity confirms that the brain rewires itself based on repeated experience and deliberate practice. The character you've been playing isn't permanent. It's a draft, and drafts can be revised. 25 facts. 25 cracks in the illusion that you fully understand the mind you're walking around with. And the truth is, these barely scratch the surface. The brain is the most complex object in the known universe, and it's sitting right behind your eyes, running programs you never agreed to, telling stories you never questioned, and making decisions you think are yours. The question isn't whether these patterns affect you. They do. The question is what you're going to do now that you can see them.